You know those houseplants that just absolutely stop you in your tracks? The ones that look, well, more like living art.
Hmm.
We're diving deep into the world of velvet leaf anthuriums today. Think, just sumptuous, velvety foliage, that almost magnetic, exotic allure.
Absolutely.
You know, those heart-shaped leaves, deep green, sometimes so dark they're almost black, and then dramatically etched with silver or maybe pink veins. They really are living art.
They truly are. And in this deep dive, we're pulling out the key insights from the Rare Anthurium Collector's Guide. We want to give you the real secrets, to successfully growing these really coveted plants.
Yeah, it's quite a journey they've been on.
It is. It stretches all the way from those grand Victorian glass houses right up to being prized possessions for today's collectors.
Exactly. And we'll be focusing on some really stunning ones. Anthurium papillilaminum, the more recent A. carlablackiae, and of course the iconic A. crystallinum.
That's right.
Our mission here is pretty straightforward. Equip you with scientifically sound care advice. We'll blend those general principles with the really crucial species-specific tips so your velvety anthuriums can genuinely thrive.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, maybe look at their background, botanically speaking. The genus Anthurium, it's huge. Part of the arum family with, gosh, at least 1,000 species, mainly from the neotropics.
Right.
And the name itself, Anthurium, it translates roughly to tail flower. That's a nod to the spadix, the flowering spike.
And these aren't your average windowsill plants, are they? They come from some pretty specific places.
Definitely not. They originate in the warm, humid rainforests, Central and South America, the Caribbean. Often you'll find them as understory herbs or maybe epiphytes clinging to trees, a bit like orchids, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Or sometimes even growing on rocks, as lithophytes.
Wow. So these velvet-leafed ones we're so fascinated by. Where do they fit in?
Well, they tend to be concentrated in a particular band, geographically speaking. Think southern Mexico down to the Andes Mountains, across Panama, and into Bolivia.
Okay.
Many of these velvety types belong to a specific group within Anthurium called section cardiolancium.
A section, like a subcategory.
Exactly, a more specific grouping based on shared traits. And that section alone has hundreds of species. Many show off that distinct velvety or maybe matte leaf surface, sometimes with really interesting ribbed petioles, the leaf stalks, and those really striking vein patterns.
Okay, so what actually makes them velvety? It's more than just how they look, right? There's science behind it.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just a catchy name. The texture comes down to microscopic cells on the leaf surface called papillose cells.
Papillose cells.
Yeah, picture tiny, convex, almost lens-shaped cells. They work to scatter incoming light, and interestingly, they also help shed water.
Clever.
It's this light scattering that creates that beautiful, soft, suede-like sheen. It's a really smart botanical adaptation, probably for diffusing light in the understory.
That is incredibly clever. And Anthurium papillilaminum, the name itself, papillose lamina, basically describes that feature, doesn't it?
Precisely. Its leaves, usually a dark olive green, are densely covered in these tiny raised papillae, giving it that classic soft, volutinous feel. What's interesting about papillilaminum compared to, say, A. crystallinum with its super bold white veins.
Right. The contrast there is huge.
Exactly. Papillilaminum typically has a more uniformly dark leaf blade. The venation isn't usually strongly contrasting, though you might see some subtle reddish tones, especially on new leaves as they unfurl.
And I read there's even a tiny botanical detail, something about a vein, that sets it apart for the real enthusiasts.
Yes, you're right. There's something called the collective vein, which runs near the leaf margin. In A. capillaminum, it's present, but unlike in some other anthuriums, it doesn't quite manage to encircle the entire leaf edge. It's these subtle little differences that, make plant identification and collecting so fascinating.
It really sounds like you could spend ages just studying one leaf. Now, these plants haven't always been sitting pretty in our living rooms, have they? They've got quite a history.
Oh, definitely. Velvet leaf anthuriums have been captivating plant lovers for, well, over a century. Back in the 1800s, European explorers were some of the first to stumble upon them in the tropics and send specimens back home.
To botanical gardens, presumably.
Yes, exactly. And by the late 19th century, these dark, velvety types, especially those with contrasting veins, were already becoming highly sought after in ornamental horticulture. They were seen as incredibly exotic, fitting right into that Victorian obsession with rare plants.
Real status symbols even then.
Absolutely. They were prized possessions, symbols of wealth and botanical curiosity.
So we're talking about the original rock stars like Anthurium crystallinum and that almost legendary Queen Anthurium awaroquianum.
Those are the icons, yes.
Yeah.
Anthurium crystallinum with those stunning emerald velvet leaves and sharp white veins that came into cultivation around 1876.
Hmm.
And then Awaroquianum, the queen, showed up around 1880. I mean, picture velvet leaves potentially growing up to 3 feet long.
3 feet. Incredible.
They absolutely created a sensation in European horticultural circles. Definitely symbols of wealth and, a certain botanical sophistication.
Status plants indeed. Now, the guide also mentions some species discovered more recently, right? Like Anthurium dressleri. That sounds intriguing.
Anthurium dressleri has a really cool discovery story. It was found in Panama's rainforest back in the 1970s
Okay.
by an American botanist, Robert Dressler, during his fieldwork. And then the famous Aroid expert, Dr. Thomas Croat, formally described it in 1978 and named it in Dressler's honor, which is quite fitting.
That's a nice tribute. And where does it typically grow? What's its natural habitat like?
It likes humid foothill rainforests, usually between about 150 and 500 meters elevation. So not super high altitude, but not lowland either.
Yeah.
Central Panama and parts of northwestern Colombia.
And how does it grow? On the ground?
Typically, yes, terrestrially. It often settles on well-drained slopes or even rocky areas. And interestingly, it can actually develop quite a slender sort of trunk-like stem, sometimes reaching up to 70 centimeters tall.
Wow. The guide calls it the holy grail of Anthuriums. Why such a grand title?
Well, it largely comes down to its incredibly regal look. It produces these large, beautiful heart-shaped leaves, and the new growth. It emerges this stunning near-black color, often with really beautiful purple hues underneath.
Oh, okay.
It just has this majestic presence that collectors find absolutely irresistible.
I can see why. And Anthurium papillilaminum, a similar discovery story there, too.
Yes, quite similar. Also found originally in Panama's lowland rainforests, actually near the Panama Canal Zone.
Oh, right.
Robert Dressler collected it back in the late 1960s, and again, Dr. Croat described it formally a bit later in 1986. Unlike dressleri, papillilaminum usually grows as a terrestrial creeper. Its stem kind of creeps along the forest floor.
So it spreads out more horizontally then.
Exactly. And it has these persistent fibrous things called caterpillars. They're like modified leaves protecting the new growth, and they stay on the stem even after they dry out.
Interesting.
The really sought-after forms of papillilaminum have incredibly dark, almost inky black leaves, sometimes with rich maroon or even violet undersides.
Beautiful.
And what makes it quite popular, relatively speaking, is that it's considered somewhat easier to grow compared to some others, and it tends to produce these elongated runner stems, which makes it a bit easier to propagate and more available.
Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us to even more recent finds, like Anthurium carlablackiae. That name sounds very contemporary.
It is, yes, a 21st century discovery. It was first found in Colombia's rainforests by the well-respected horticulturist Carla Black, hence the name.
Ah, another nice tribute.
Introduced into cultivation probably in the 2010s, and then officially described botanically in 2020. Its native home is the wet tropical rainforest spanning parts of Panama and Colombia.
And what makes this one stand out? What are its key features?
It's a fairly compact plant, grows in the understory, and it offers this really striking visual contrast. The leaves are almost black velvet, but they're marked with these incredibly bold, crisp white veins.
Wow, that sounds dramatic.
It is. And the petioles, the loose stalks, they're often distinctly ridged and have this reddish burgundy color. The leaves themselves often hang horizontally or even droop a bit, giving it a really dramatic low-slung look. And uniquely among these specific velvet types, it has a particularly lovely flower, a creamy white spathe, but edged with this delicate pink margin around a pale yellow-green spadix. It's really quite elegant.
It sounds gorgeous, but the guide mentions something about most cultivated plants coming from just a few sources.
That's generally true, yes. Most carlablackiae you find in collections today trace back to just a handful of wild collected clones. These were initially shared among a network of expert growers.
Right.
It really highlights both the excitement around new discoveries and how rarity can persist even once a plant enters cultivation.
It's incredible to think about these plants journeying from remote rainforests into our homes. How did that shift happen? How has their cultivation evolved?
Well, initially, as we said, they were really exclusive, mostly found in botanical gardens or the collections of wealthy people who could afford the specialized greenhouses needed Constant high humidity, stable warmth.
The Victorian glass houses we mentioned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But later in the 20th century, things started to change. Advances in propagation, especially tissue culture, along with growing international plant trade, slowly made them more available.
Okay.
Specialized nurseries, like Ecuagenera, which operates in Panama and Ecuador, played a big role. They started propagating a wider variety of species, making them more accessible, and sometimes bringing prices down from truly astronomical levels.
And hybridization efforts also played a part, didn't they? Creating new varieties.
Absolutely. Breeders began intentionally crossing different species, maybe trying to combine, say, the huge size of A. orocianum with the easier care of another species.
Right.
And today, thankfully, there's so much knowledge sharing in plant communities online, plus ongoing improvements in propagation. It means even species once considered incredibly rare can now be grown successfully by dedicated hobbyists, provided you're willing to meet their specific needs, of course.
That's great news for plant lovers. More people get to enjoy them, but the guide also flags some downsides to this popularity, right?
Yes, unfortunately. The high demand for rare plants has, sadly, fueled some unethical practices. Things like poaching from the wild, which is hugely damaging.
Oh, no.
And also sometimes plants being sold online with misleading or even completely fake names. It muddies the waters for collectors.
That's a real problem.
It is. And that's exactly why the Rare Anthurium Collector's Guide really stresses how important it is to buy from reputable sources. Sellers who can ideally provide some documentation about the plant origin or lineage. Ethical sourcing is key.
Definitely sounds like something buyers need to be aware of. Okay, shifting focus a bit beyond the botany, why are these velvet anthuriums so significant in horticulture and even interior design?
Well, horticulturally speaking, these plants, valued for their amazing leaves rather than flashy flowers, really captured the interest of orchid collectors and other tropical plant fans early on.
Because the leaves look good all year round.
Precisely. They offer constant beauty, unlike plants that just bloom seasonally. You often see stunning, large specimens used as focal points in public conservatories and botanical garden collections. They showcase that amazing texture in architectural form.
And the whole urban jungle trend has definitely boosted their profile among regular home gardeners, too.
Oh, massively. In the last few decades, as indoor gardening exploded, these anthuriums became real status symbols for serious houseplant collectors.
Right.
You see them constantly featured in magazines and online groups as most wanted plants. Species like A. clarinervium or A. crystallinum are often suggested as good, well, relatively good starting points for people wanting to get into rarer tropicals.
And the guide even says some are seen as the ultimate prize.
Yes, absolutely. Getting your hands on, say, the intensely dark A. dressleri or truly majestic, mature A. warockianum, that's often considered the pinnacle for many collectors. It definitely confers a certain prestige if you can grow them well.
I bet. And how do they fit into interior design? It sounds like more than just sticking a pot on a shelf.
Oh, much more. In modern interior design, velvet leaf anthuriums are often treated like living sculptures, really. Their bold shapes and unique textures are a fantastic counterpoint to contemporary styles.
Like pairing them with specific furniture.
Exactly. Imagine a potted Anthurium crystallinum. Those dark green leaves with the silver veins may be placed next to some clean-lined mid-century furniture. It instantly elevates the whole room, creates a real focal point.
They definitely have a luxurious feel.
They really do. Designers love using their rich, jewel-toned foliage to bring in that touch of lush, tropical sophistication, especially in high-end homes or commercial spaces. The color palette, deep greens, burgundies, near blacks, works beautifully with popular design materials like brass, marble, and of course velvet fabrics. You see them featured in design magazines all the time as symbols of refined tropical style.
But the guide makes a practical point too. They need specific conditions, right? So placement matters.
That's crucial, yes. Because they absolutely need high humidity, you often find them displayed strategically. Think well-lit bathrooms, dedicated sunrooms, or increasingly inside specialized greenhouse cabinets, not just casually placed on a coffee table in a dry living room.
Right.
For serious collectors and plant stylists, meeting that challenge of replicating their ideal environment is actually part of the appeal. It's about curating the perfect indoor habitat to show the plant off at its best.
It's a real commitment, and this appreciation goes beyond individuals, doesn't it? There are societies and events.
Absolutely. The cultural significance is clear. You have dedicated groups like the International Aroid Society, and their annual shows often feature incredible anthurium displays. Plants are judged on leaf size, color, texture, overall health.
Wow.
Plus, skilled horticulturists are always working on new hybrids. They're intentionally crossing different velvet leaf species to create even more visually stunning combinations.
Like combining the best traits.
Exactly.
Okay.
Crosses like A. papillilaminum crossed with A. crystallinum or maybe A. dressleri with A. magnificum, these are highly sought after because they might blend those deep velvety colors with really intricate contrasting veins
So new varieties are always appearing.
all the time. These new hybrids often get cool, evocative names and are released in small batches, which just fuels the excitement among collectors. And in places with the right climate, you even see rare anthuriums used in high-end outdoor landscaping, a definite sign of sophisticated plant taste.
It really shows how cherished these plants are. Okay, let's get down to the practical side. We know their history, their appeal, but how do we actually keep these velvet treasures happy? What's the essential care guide look like?
Well, the core idea, the fundamental principle, is recreating that rainforest floor environment as much as possible. So that means gentle light, lots of moisture, and warm, stable temperatures.
Okay, let's start with light. Rainforest understory sounds shady, but the advice is usually bright, indirect light, right? How does that work?
That's exactly it. Direct sun is a definite no-no. It will scorch those beautiful velvety leaves very quickly. So you want filtered light, maybe through sheer curtains or placing the plant a few feet back from a bright window.
And undergrow lights?
Moderate intensity is generally best. And, there are some subtle differences between species here that are worth knowing.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, Anthurium dressleri, for instance, is known to be quite sensitive to strong light. Many experienced growers keep it under, say, 200-foot candles or so to really maintain that deep, dark leaf color. It does better in shadier indoor spots or under dimmer grow lights.
Oh, okay.
Carlablackiae, on the other hand, seems to tolerate slightly brighter indirect light, maybe up to around 300-foot candles without bleaching out.
And papillilaminum.
It falls somewhere in between. It generally prefers moderate to low light, but isn't quite as instantly prone to burning as dressleri. It can adapt to slightly higher light if you acclimate it carefully.
So how do we know if the light is wrong? What should we look for on the plant?
Good question. If the leaves start looking faded, losing that deep color intensity, or if you see yellowish patches developing, the light is probably too strong.
Oh, okay.
On the flip side, if the plant gets leggy stems stretching out or the new leaves come in noticeably smaller than the older ones, it's likely not getting enough light.
Got it. Light levels covered. What about temperature? Warm and stable, is that the main rule?
Precisely. You want to aim for a pretty consistent range, somewhere between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 18 to 27 Celsius. They are true tropicals, so they really dislike cold drafts or frost.
Right.
Letting temperatures dip below about 60 Fahrenheit or 16 Celsius for too long can cause problems like yellowing leaves or even blackening. Normal room temperatures are usually okay, but just be aware of spots near drafty windows in winter or right under AC vents in summer.
And do our specific species have any particular temperature quirks?
Yes, some of the ones that come from slightly higher elevations can actually appreciate a small drop in temperature at night. A dressleri and A. rockianum, for example.
Oh, interesting.
Their natural habitats have cooler nights, so a dip into the high 60s Fahrenheit around 20 Celsius can be beneficial. Some growers even say dressleri gets its deepest purple-black new leaves with that slight night cooling.
Ah,
But the key is avoiding drastic swings. Consistency overall is vital. A. carlablackiae and A. papillilaminum, being from lower elevations, generally prefer things continuously warm. And regardless of the species, good air circulation is really important alongside the warmth, mainly to help prevent fungal problems.
makes total sense. Stagnant warm air sounds like trouble. Okay, now for the big one, humidity, the rainforest signature. How high are we talking?
This is often the make or break factor, honestly. You really need high humidity for long-term success. Ideally, aim for 60 to 80% relative humidity, or even higher if you can manage it. That's what truly mimics their home.
And if your home is dry?
Then you'll definitely need to boost it. Using a humidifier is probably the most effective way. Pebble trays with water can help a bit locally, or grouping plants together. For the real high humidity lovers, growing them in a glass cabinet or a terrarium is often the best solution.
What about misting? Does that help?
It gives a temporary boost, but it's not a long-term fix. If you do mist, try to do it in the morning so the leaves dry off before nightfall. Wet leaves overnight can invite fungus.
Right. And again, are some species needier than others with humidity?
Oh, definitely. A. papillilaminum is known to be a bit more tolerant. You can often acclimate it gradually to average household humidity, maybe around 50% if you're careful.
Okay, that's good to know.
But A. dressleri and A. carlablackiae, they really need it consistently above 70% to truly thrive. If the air is too dry, you'll see those brown, crispy leaf edges, or new leaves might struggle to unfurl properly, getting stuck or torn.
Ah, that's a key sign then, stuck or tearing new leaves.
Exactly. That often points straight to low humidity. Grouping plants helps, as does using a grow tent if you have one. And it's worth investing in a hygrometer to actually measure the humidity. Just remember, even in high humidity, you still need that air movement to prevent stagnant air and potential fungal issues.
So high humidity, but with airflow. It's a balancing act. Okay, let's talk watering. How do we hit that sweet spot? Enough water, but definitely no root rot.
The goal is consistently even moisture in the potting mix, but never, ever waterlogged. The general rule is to water when the top inch or so of the mix just starts to feel dry.
Don't let them dry out completely then.
No, definitely not. They're sensitive to drying out completely. If the mix gets bone dry, the roots suffer, the leaves suffer, you might see drooping, wilting, those crispy brown edges again.
But equally, overwatering is a huge risk.
Massive risk. Letting the roots sit in soggy soil is a fast track to root rot, which can easily kill the plant. So rule number 1, always use a pot with good drainage holes. And rule number 2, after watering, always empty the saucer underneath. Don't let the pot sit in standing water. When you do water, water thoroughly until you see it running out the bottom. That ensures the whole root ball gets wet. Then let all the excess drain away.
Does humidity affect watering frequency?
Yes, if you have very high humidity or if your potting mix is quite moisture retentive, you'll likely need to water less often. You just have to monitor the soil.
Any specific watering tips for our featured species? They have slightly thicker leaves, you mentioned.
Yes, many velvet types have leaves described as subcoriaceous, sort of leathery but not super thick. This might give them a slightly better tolerance for brief dry spells compared to plants with really thin leaves.
Okay.
Papillilaminum's leaves are sometimes described as less than fully leathery, so maybe it handles slight drying a bit better. But honestly, aiming for consistent moisture is always the best strategy for optimal growth.
And what are the warning signs for watering issues?
Look at the leaves. Wilting or feeling soft and limp usually means underwatering. Yellowing lower leaves or seeing the stem turn black near the soil line, those are classic signs of overwatering.
Right.
You also need to adjust with the seasons, water more in spring and summer when they're actively growing, less in fall and winter when growth slows. And using lukewarm, dechlorinated water is always a good idea, if possible. Cold tap water can sometimes shock the roots.
Okay, super helpful watering advice. Now, what about the soil itself? I assume regular potting soil is out.
Absolutely out. You need something loose, airy, and rich in organic matter. Think about what they grow in naturally decomposing leaves, mossy bark on trees. Heavy garden soil or standard potting mix compacts too easily, cuts off oxygen to the roots, and holds way too much water.
So we need to make our own aroid mix.
That's the best approach, yes. You want chunky ingredients that create air pockets.
What's a good basic recipe for that?
A really common and effective mix is roughly equal parts of coarse orchid bark, perlite or maybe pumice for aeration, and then something to hold a bit of moisture, like fibrous peat moss or cocoa coir.
Okay.
You can also add extras like chopped sphagnum moss, great for moisture retention without becoming soggy, and maybe some horticultural charcoal for drainage and keeping the mix sweet. This combination gives you that essential drainage and aeration, plus enough moisture retention. Some people also add a bit of worm castings for slow-release nutrients. The pH should end up slightly acidic to neutral, which these ingredients usually provide naturally.
Are there any totally soil-free options that experts use?
Yes, some very experienced growers use things like pure pon, that's a porous ceramic substrate, or even coarse tree fern fiber, often in self-watering setups.
Oh, interesting.
These methods really maximize drainage and aim for constant moisture delivery. But if you go that route, high ambient humidity becomes even more critical. You have to flush the medium regularly to prevent salt buildup from fertilizers.
Right. And pot size, do they like room to spread or be snug?
They generally prefer to be slightly snug, a bit root-bound. So choose a pot that just comfortably fits the current root system. Repot only when they're clearly getting crowded, maybe every 1-2 years. And be super gentle with the roots when you do repot. They can be surprisingly brittle.
Good tip.
Oh, and for climbers like papillilaminum, definitely give them a moss pole or stake to climb on as they mature. The leaves get bigger and heavier.
Excellent foundation advice. Now, feeding them fertilization, are they hungry plants or light feeders?
They're not super heavy feeders compared to, say, fast-growing vines, but they definitely appreciate regular light feeding during the growing season, spring and summer mostly.
Okay.
A balanced liquid fertilizer, maybe a 20-20-20 or 10-10-10 NPK, diluted to half or even quarter strength, works well. Apply that maybe once a month or every 6 to 8 weeks while they're actively growing.
What about slow release options?
Yeah, slow-release pellets like Osmocote can work too. Just use them sparingly, maybe a light sprinkle on the soil surface every 4 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, always water the plant before you fertilize. Never fertilize dry soil. That's asking for root burn.
Right. Are there specific fertilizers that work particularly well for these foliage-focused plants?
Since we grow them for the leaves, a fertilizer slightly higher in nitrogen can be beneficial, as nitrogen fuels leaf growth. Orchid or specific aroid fertilizers often have good nutrient ratios too.
Mm-hmm.
Some growers like a 3:1:2 NPK ratio or use foliage-focused type fertilizers at low doses, maybe half strength every couple of weeks in peak season. But remember, slower growers like A. dressleri and A. carlablackiae need less feeding than faster ones like A. papillilaminum. It's always better to underfeed than overfeed these guys.
And how do we know if we're getting the feeding wrong?
Watch the plant. Pale new leaves or very slow growth might mean they need a bit more nutrition. Brown, crispy leaf tips, or a white crusty buildup on the soil surface, classic signs of too much fertilizer. And definitely cut back or stop feeding altogether in fall and winter when growth naturally slows right down.
Very clear. Okay, so if we fall completely in love with them, how to make more? Propagation time.
Right. There are two main ways: vegetative cuttings, which is more common for hobbyists, or growing from seed, which is definitely a longer game requiring more patience and skill.
Let's start with cuttings then. That sounds more approachable.
Definitely. Many anthuriums produce offshoots or pups at the base, or they develop longer, creeping stems. You can carefully separate these to create new plants.
Okay.
If you have a mature plant with a distinct stem, you can take a stem cutting. Always use a sterile, sharp blade. You want a piece of stem with at least one node, that little bump where leaves and roots emerge, and ideally some existing roots, or even just those little aerial root nubs.
Right.
For climbers like papillilaminum, taking a top cutting with a few leaves and some roots is often successful. Then you plant the cutting in something like moist sphagnum moss or your aroid mix. Keep it warm and very humid, maybe under a plastic dome or in a prop box. Roots should develop from the node in a few weeks to months. Just keep the medium lightly moist, not wet.
And what about dividing a clumpy plant?
That's another good method, especially if your plant naturally forms multiple growth points. When you repot, you can carefully separate the clump, making sure each division has a good set of roots and at least one growing point or leaf. It's often less risky than stem cuttings for some types.
Okay. Now, seed propagation sounds complicated.
It is more involved, yes.
Yeah.
First, you need pollination. Most anthuriums aren't self-fertile because the male and female flower parts mature at different times.
Ah, yeah.
So if you have two compatible plants flowering together, you can try hand-pollinating, transferring pollen from one spadix to the receptive female flowers. They often look sticky on the other. You might need to do it over several days. If it works, berries develop over months. They contain one or two seeds inside pulp. When the berries soften and change color, often red or orange, they're ripe. You clean off the pulp. It inhibits germination and sow the fresh seeds immediately onto a moist, sterile medium like sphagnum. High humidity and warmth are critical. Germination takes weeks, and the seedlings are tiny and grow very slowly. It can take a year or two before they look like mini anthuriums.
Wow, definitely a long-term project. Any propagation tips specific to our star species?
Well, A. papillilaminum is known for those longer stems, making it relatively easier to propagate from stem cuttings. A. dressleri tends to be more solitary, but stem cuttings are possible if it develops one, though it can be a bit sensitive and needs warmth for rooting. A. carlablackiae is very compact, so it's usually propagated by seed or occasionally from basal shoots. Divisions from the original discovery plant are out there in specialist collections.
Good to know.
And always, only propagate from healthy, mature plants to avoid stressing them, and expect some trial and error. If you're serious about seeds, definitely look up detailed guides from expert growers on pollination timing and techniques.
Absolutely. Okay, let's tackle the less fun stuff. Pests and diseases. What should we watch out for with velvet anthuriums?
Like most houseplants, they can attract a few common pests. Regular inspection is key, because even small infestations can spoil those beautiful leaves.
What are the main culprits?
Thrips and spider mites can be particularly annoying on velvet leaves. Thrips leave silvery damage and tiny black spots. Spider mites cause yellow speckling and fine webs, especially underneath leaves in dry air.
Ugh, spider mites.
Yeah. Then you have mealybugs and scale.
Mm.
Look for cottony blobs or hard brown bumps, often tucked away in leaf axils or on stems. And fungus gnats, those little flies buzzing around wet soil, though the larvae can sometimes damage roots.
So prevention is key, I guess.
Definitely. Good humidity with good airflow helps deter many issues. Always inspect new plants thoroughly before adding them to your collection. Pests love to hitchhike. And regularly wiping leaves gently with a damp cloth, maybe with a tiny bit of neem oil, can physically remove dust and deter some pests.
And if you do find pests, what's the plan?
First step, isolate the plant immediately to stop them spreading. Then, treat based on the pest. For things like thrips, mites, aphids, insecticidal soap or neem oil sprays applied thoroughly and repeatedly every week or so can work.
Okay.
For scale and mealybugs, physically removing them with rubbing alcohol on a cotton swab can help. If it's a bad infestation, you might need to consider a systemic insecticide, though many collectors prefer starting with less harsh methods on these valuable plants. Diligence is key with organic treatments.
Right. What about diseases? Anything specific to worry about?
The main one to be really vigilant about is bacterial blight, usually caused by Xanthomonas bacteria. It shows up as black, sort of water-soaked spots or lesions on the leaves.
That sounds bad.
It can be, unfortunately. It spreads fast in warm, humid, stagnant conditions and can kill the plant. If you see it, isolate immediately. Cut off affected leaves with sterile tools. Be super careful not to spread it, and maybe use a copper bufactericide as a preventative on remaining parts or nearby plants. Sterilize everything.
Okay, scary, but good to know. Other issues?
Other common problems are usually fungal leaf spots, stem rot, root rot, often linked back to overwatering or poor drainage. Good airflow and not letting the soil stay soggy are the best defenses. If you get rot, you might need to cut away the bad parts and try to reroot healthy sections. And again, using clean pots and fresh mix when potting helps avoid introducing pathogens. Some collectors even give new plants a preventative fungicide drench. Basically, good hygiene and regular checks go a long way.
That's a really thorough guide to troubleshooting. Okay, lastly, while we adore the foliage, they do flower, don't they? What are the blooms generally like?
They do, yes. When they're happy and mature, they'll usually flower maybe once or twice a year. The typical Anthurium flower has that central spike, the spadix, covered in tiny flowers, and the surrounding bract, the spathe. For these velvet leaf types, the spathes are often more subtle, maybe greenish, white, maroon, sometimes with a colored edge, not usually big and flashy like florist Anthuriums.
Right.
So a dressleri has a white to pale green spathe, maybe blushing pink, with a creamy yellow spadix. A carlablackiae has that lovely white spathe edged in pink. A papillilaminum usually has a green spathe, maybe with a reddish-purple tint.
And the actual tiny flowers on the spadix are interesting botanically, even if we don't focus on them?
Exactly. They're bisexual, but usually mature at different times. Female phase first, then male, which encourages cross-pollination, as we talked about for seed production. If they don't get pollinated, the whole inflorescence just matures and fades after a few weeks. Don't worry if the first flower on a young plant aborts. That can happen.
Any tips for encouraging or managing flowering? Should we cut them off?
You can let them flower naturally. Doesn't usually harm a healthy plant, though it uses some energy. Some growers who aren't trying for seeds do cut the flower stalks off early to redirect energy into leaves. It's personal preference, really.
Okay.
While flowering, just keep conditions stable, avoid moving the plant around. Some say a fertilizer, slightly higher in phosphorus, a genome booster, might help encourage blooms, but consistent good care and maturity are the main things. Not like orchids that need specific triggers.
Yeah.
And remember, if you do get berries, they take months, like 4 to 6 months, to ripen. They'll swell and change color.
Gotcha.
So yeah, the flowers might not be the main event for velvet leaves, but they're architecturally interesting. Show the plant's life cycle, and hey, a flowering anthurium is usually a happy anthurium.
It really does sound like looking after these incredible plants is such a rewarding experience.
It absolutely is. Definitely a labor of love, but the payoff is having this spectacular living art right there with you. They connect us to those amazing tropical forests and the history of plant discovery. And by really digging into understanding their history and what they need, we just become better caretakers, don't we? And keep learning.
Yeah.
Talk to other growers, read reliable sources. The plant community has so much collective wisdom. And remember, each plant is an individual. It'll have its own little quirks. So observing carefully and adjusting your care based on your plant and your conditions is absolutely key.
It's like an ongoing conversation with your plants, learning as you go.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
So may your velvet leaf anthuriums flourish. Enjoy every new leaf that unfurls. It's a little testament to nature's beauty and your own dedication as a grower.
And for anyone listening who wants to dive even deeper, definitely check out the comprehensive Rare Anthurium Collector's Guide. You can find it online at twptropical.etsy.com.